Jughead 2010s. After a cover that just make people cock an eyebrow and dismiss the issue as nonsense, someone shouts that Jughead's on a date, which would only happen if you wanted free food. And I immediately get disappointed with the art style. I guess it looks good aesthetically, but it's ridiculous that Archie thought their earlier art style wouldn't be what the fanbase would want when it's worked for decades. So we don't need this anime shit. He's being talked to by this blonde nobody who we called and said it was an emergency. The only male Archie characters I remember being blonde and muscular are Moose and Alan M. In either way, I'm wondering why he thought to call him, and not Archie. He tells Jughead that all he has to do is go to a restaurant. Obviously, the writer hasn't experienced any of the stories before this point where Jughead did date or got referenced to be dating purely to get food. He's dated girls because their fathers were in the food business. Not to mention he's been forced to go on double dates. So even Jughead wouldn't have no idea what to do on a date because he's been on them before. Jughead says the person he'll be dating has expectations and wants date activities. Somehow expecting that from Jughead. Jughead says that he just wanted to hang out with a giant burger, and then he goes back to Sabrina, who would obviously never consider dating him in a million years, as he's supposed to be an ugly woman hater. Even a toddler who knows the Archie comics would know this would never happen. So it should have been established as being in a different universe. The only reason they'd go on a date is because someone lost a bet, and Sabrina's too honorable to memory erase to get out of it. Because if Jughead wanted food, he could get it a different way. When he says a blatant lie about why he was in the bathroom so long, at least she doesn't believe him. Somehow the next page isn't a flashback to tell us how the hell they got to this point. But I bet they couldn't explain that properly anyways. Jughead says he doesn't see any burger platters, and Sabrina says she gets enough of that at work, which threw me off because I'd only expect an adult to say that. But teenagers can get jobs. I'm just not used to the idea that Sabrina would have the kind of job a teenager would, because that barely ever happened. She wants the opposite of a burger, and Jughead says he invented that and describes it as 2 meat patties surrounding half a bun. They show good chemistry for the second time ever, because Sabrina says it sounds delicious and they smile at each other. Oh, the blonde's called Kevin. Why did you use this character instead of Alan M. or Moose? It doesn't seem like he's any different in personality from Alan anyways. This guy means nothing to me, yet every main character seems to know who he is. So I feel like he's being shoved down my throat. Anyone would think they'd use Archie in this position instead, because Archie's his best friend. He'd never in a million years rely on anyone other than Archie or Betty as his main confidant, if they exist. These are such fundamental mistakes, it should be so easy not to make. I feel like I'm reviewing a fanfiction from someone who barely knows the Archie series. It would make more sense if this was a DeviantArt comic. It's very distracting for me how sloppy this is when I just want to get through an intriguing story. Jughead makes it too obvious he's why Kevin's here, so you'd think he wouldn't say this. Kevin wants him to return the phone he stole from his pocket. Jughead wants him to stay. Somehow, neither of these two had the common sense to have their first date be chaperoned like this, or a double date at least, because they'd be more comfortable that way. Jughead says Kevin's a more recent arrival to Riverdale too, and when Kevin says the town's different than Sabrina must have expected, instead of Sabrina saying that she lived here most of her life, and it's only a recent arrival because she lived in Greendale for a bit, somehow Sabrina agrees with him. You'd think literally anybody with a passing familiarity with Archie would know that Sabrina's lived in Riverdale since she was a kid in Little Sabrina. If you're gonna write a story that completely disregards everything about the past canon, disrespectfully so, you need to put a text box at the start of the story saying that's an alternate universe. And then I'd accept everything they got wrong and like it for being creative and taking advantage of that idea. Instead it comes off as unprofessional. Kevin says he's not sure he knows Jughead at all because Jughead he knows wouldn't be a jerk about things. That's total bullshit too. There's been tons of times Jughead had a money-making scheme that involved tricking his friends. And that's part of the whole appeal of his character, actually. You'd have to have never read the comics to think this. Kevin apologizes, is polite to Sabrina, and then abandons Jughead when he clearly wants him to stay here for no reason. So Kevin's a selfish asshole that I have no reason to like. Way to go. Brilliant, amazing new character. Sabrina says she won't be mad if Jughead wants to go home, which is better than Betty and Veronica. But Jughead says no and lies that he's been having a great time. I hate when plots only keep going because a character was impossibly stupid. He deserves to go through this if he's too dumb to just say yes already. Why is he even bothering to lie to a witch anyways? The two of them get given a nacho platter. Based on the look of the waiter, with a mustache, I thought this was a fancy, expensive French restaurant. Would there ever be nachos served at a place like that? This seems so jarring for a story that wants you to take it seriously. At least they're getting along well, because Sabrina loves not only the nachos, but also the way Jughead talks about food. It never occurred to me that she'd not be as bored as I am by meticulously describing a recipe. She's always been optimistic and idealistic. But this comes off as the writer exaggerating to make them seem like they'd be the perfect couple. At least this looks like a better ship with Jughead than any of the other girls, like Trudy or Ethel, because they never had these moments. I'd be raging if they had terrible chemistry and still dated. Sabrina says she likes seeing him like that, as he has his eyes closed, reminding me that he's supposed to usually have them closed. Sure, it makes no sense, but that's how he's always been, and you can't even get that right anymore. Jughead gets text messages from Archie, who says his car is on the way here, and we see that he doesn't want to hurt her feelings. As I remember that this is only happening because Harvey's being ignored with no explanation at all, Sabrina says she knows he's nervous and understands that he thinks he has to act a certain way to impress her when he doesn't. He's about to say there's something she should know, when Archie shows up with a fake mustache and waiter outfit and his French accent is spelled out, making it completely obnoxious to read. I don't feel like reading all of it. He's not Antoine. How the hell did he get allowed to do this unless he works here? Sabrina goes to the bathroom, admitting to herself that this day is a disaster, and then decides to pour some potion into the sink and says that Jughead won't know it hit him. So it goes from hammering it into your head that she's great for him and can actually be trusted, to proving she can't be trusted. She sees Archie happily looking up at some flying birds dropping rose petals, and I wonder if they were brainwashed. But Jughead is still looking at his phone, when it's instantly obvious that he wouldn't be immune to her magic. There was a story very recently about her casting a love spell on him. I thought she was just gonna do that. She then takes a hair from his head, which hurts, and somehow, instead of following her from assuming that she's gonna use it for a potion or spell, because why else would she settle for this to punish him? He just says there's a lot he doesn't know about swans. Sabrina pours a potion and says a spell, and makes a love arrow that goes through the door, hoping that it'll turn Jughead's mildest attraction into full-blown love. I always thought that she'd have stopped with the love spells and potions entirely, because while we didn't know any better in the 70s, nowadays any writer would know how creepy they are. Hence why Rick called a love potion a rupee potion. Sabrina says the potion was expensive, so she must really want to save on magic, because I know she doesn't need potions to do this. Sabrina's been selfish before, but it still feels out of character. She apologizes for leaving. Jughead says he literally loved his nachos, when it's instantly obvious that he would have been made to love her, and she flips the table over, which is out of character even by her standards. She's lost her temper and done things like pour an ice cream sundae on someone or abuse magic, but this is something I don't remember Veronica doing. And it's so silly to shift from her being incredibly patient with him and like him for who he is, to this. Like, what does this writer want me to think? That she's the best or not? She says she's had it with the date, and out of nowhere she's had it with the whole town of Riverdale. The writing gets even more unprofessional when she says it's surprisingly full of teenagers her own age. Was that actually supposed to be clever? Every town is full of teens her age. Literally every town with a high school close enough to it. There's a high school in the town, of course there's tons of people our age. Is the writer really so arrogant and stupid that he thinks this was a brilliant, witty observation that would have thousands of fans calling him a self-aware genius? Fuck this. As if Sabrina would ever be fed up with Riverdale. She bores me with an overly long text bubble saying that this was her worst day ever because he acted weird whenever things went well, and won't notice when seabirds dump rose petals all over the place. Jughead says he was just looking up if pelicans needed medical attention after spewing flowers, because it's not something they should be eating. Sabrina implies that her magic made it so that wasn't the case, because she gets mad and storms off instead of reassuring him. If the Sabrina I know thought he was right, she'd be horrified that she did that to those pelicans. You'd think you know Sabrina's not an animal abuser at least. And I immediately got tired of there being a line below the bottom panels, by the way. I don't know what this line is, and why I'm supposed to find it humorous and charming, when no comic does this. All I know is this is the worst style of Archie I've ever seen. It's pathetic when even the oldest comics where Archie looks realistic are still fantastic compared to this fanfiction. Speaking of that, Archie wastes time with the phone thinking he should smile at a time like this for some reason. So that wasted a whole page. Why have we been shown the next day instead of the reason for why Sabrina and Jughead went on a date? I mean, this is literally a crack pairing. Any ship with Jughead is. At least explain that Enchantra brainwashed her to want to date him. The next day, Sabrina decides to cast a spell outside of Jughead's classroom while casually playing hooky to make Jughead raise a hand to answer every math question the teacher asks. It's so out of character of her to be this vindictive for such a petty reason. It's not like Jughead cheated on her or did something legitimately horrible. He was just nervous on his first date, go figure. On the one hand, it's good for escapism that she's abusing magic, with no one restricting her. But if she fails every time, it just makes me wish this was Alexandra instead. Because I won't be feeling sorry for her, and angry that she isn't more of a badass. So far, 2010 Sabrina has been nothing but having her magic do bad things and go wrong, instead of it being used for good, which was supposed to be what was subversive about the series. 90% of the whole reason I'd recommend it. I like that Jughead got all the answers right because he read ahead, but didn't feel like bragging. You'd think this was OC too, but I do think of him as smart because of old comics like Archie's pal Jughead. Even without his money-making schemes, he got the highest mark in class on an exam once. And there were stories with him making inventions, stories with him making crazy things from school chemicals. Most people would see this as a deus ex machina because there really was no indication that he was great at math. But I guess it's okay, mainly because it's lighthearted. Sabrina shouldn't be winning here. And the idea of her abusing magic a lot against someone important to the series is intriguing and exciting. I just wish the art was good and the writer actually read an Archie comic before. Because you don't need this ridiculous excuse for a story where she turns on Jughead. You could have come up with a million other excuses that weren't pathetically out of character for both of them. Sabrina didn't abuse magic on Harvey in the sitcom all day when he broke up with her. And Jughead didn't even break up with her to provoke this. So maybe everyone would like it better if this was Hilda instead, being overprotective of Sabrina. Archie says he appreciates how careful Jughead is with his friendship to not want to make him feel dumb. As I'm remembering the real Jughead, who wasn't afraid to call Archie a fool for dating Veronica, or tricking him with money-making schemes, which was more interesting for the sheer plot variety. Then in biology class, Sabrina casts a spell with the wand for no reason at all, and you'd think the whole class would hear her and Salem talking outside the open window. She uses magic to send snakes into Jughead's bag when he's trying to hand the teacher some homework. Go figure the teacher is somehow happy about the sheer variety of snakes instead of simply being terrified of snakes biting and killing him. Just because he's a biology teacher. If this was Reggie, he would have gotten detention. He at least explains that Riverdale's Learning Lab will love this donation. It's realistic that some teachers would insist on calling Jughead by his real name. But it's still jarring because that literally never happens. He makes the mistake of telling the students that they should all go this above and beyond, which makes it more obvious that she could be making Jughead get a reputation as a teacher's pet. This doesn't backfire either. Teacher miraculously cancels the test for today in favor of the class learning how to set up proper habitats for these new snakes. Okay, Salem looks creepy, but way better than he has in years. At least he's mostly black-colored finally, even if he's small to the point of looking like a little kitten, which has nothing to do with his personality. Sports jockeys threaten to hit him in gym class, just because they're sports jocks. It's telling that this never happened in the older Archie comics, even all the way up to the 90s. What is it about the 2000s that apparently started this whole tired cliche? I never saw any popular girl clique in Archie comics either, which also reflects reality. Jughead says he knows Reggie's trying to impress his gym buddies here. Nobody would think that was Reggie. Why does this have to be how Reggie's portrayed, when he was never a bully who committed violence for no reason? He was a prankster, and that made him entertaining because of all the different ideas he came up with. It symbolizes how creatively bankrupt the comics are now, like they ran out of good prank ideas for Reggie, so they just have him do the same thing over and over. You might as well not even have Reggie anymore at this point, and just replace him with any bully character. Someone other than Reggie punches Jughead for him for no reason, so why did Reggie even bother provoking Jughead, who clearly should have just run away instead? You'd think he'd know that Reggie wanted to punch him. Sabrina casts a spell, forcing Jughead to hang out with Reggie all day. We see a montage where they share a go-kart, share a trophy that the comic was too lazy to tell me how they won, get burgers, and have a conversation the whole time. It feels like a narrative cheat that we aren't shown even snippets of what their conversations were like. Because the writer was too lazy to come up with them, and probably knew that nobody could justify them having fun all day long. Reggie admits to Jughead that he's a jerk because he's afraid of people thinking he's a loser, so he calls them losers first, and hopes that it'll impress someone, when it clearly wouldn't impress anyone. It's not too believable that he'd admit this to him, when he never did before in all this time. And maybe I'd believe him if he said he's afraid of this because of his parents thinking he's a loser. He says hanging out with him was great, and they never get to do things just the two of them. And he learned a lot about himself, and got more confidence that he doesn't have to be a jerk all the time. This is heartwarming and all, but isn't Reggie actually confident throughout the series? I read all of Archie's rival Reggie. I never saw him saying something like this. I never even saw him interact with his parents a lot. It's so confusing to go from portraying him as a stereotypical bully to the type of person who can have a friendship montage with Jughead. Salem's written to Lampshade, "Sabrina, you're a literal witch! How are you failing to take revenge on a single cool teen?" If the writer thought about this, I'm baffled. Most of the time it's kind of believable that she failed, but still there's a million different spells she could have used that would have not backfired. But bad date or not, it's so out of character for Sabrina to still be at this. Why couldn't her date have been with Dilton? Would have made just as little sense. So that's no excuse for her not dating him. And him talking her ear off about pointless trivia would make for a much worse date, if she's easily bored. But it'd also have the dialogue be far more interesting. Sabrina warps a cauldron and potions to her, saying that she wants to bring out the big guns. Salem reminds her that while he's all for it, witches aren't allowed to reveal themselves to mortals. But they're allowed to bully them with their powers. So this is back to 70s style logic. Sabrina says there's one way she can reveal her magic and not break the rules, and it's with an amnesia spell. And Salem would say ensuring there's no survivors and then correct himself, because he knows she wouldn't say that. Not to mention that wouldn't be a way she could get around that rule. He wonders if she's sure she can handle this, and she's in front of a cauldron that fires a laser above it for no apparent reason. But for absolutely no reason, after wasting our time with Jughead seeing some light, the story ends there after blatantly wasting the rest of the panels on what could have been plot progression. The story ends there because the rest of the comic was wasted on reprints of older style stories. It's frustrating because I know it didn't have to end here when it feels like the story's middle. I know Archie can afford to have the story take up a whole issue because of the gender swap issue. Unless this Jughead comic in particular had no budget, I'd have to assume they know the new style isn't profitable, and people only buy this for the older stories. Which kind of aren't a waste of comic space then, as they're the only reason buying this would be worth it. Why have the reprints there if you think they've got no appeal because you're making this? Why did the last panel have a hashtag over it, when already a panel above it was completely tone shifting? This looks so pathetically unprofessional. That's how I describe everything weird about this issue. Pathetic, after decades of them knowing better. Did they get new people in charge of Archie? Oh god, I hope they weren't people who thought they were Archie fans, because that certainly doesn't come off like that. This issue by Ryan North. Go figure, it's not one of the older Sabrina writers I know and care about, because it's a story about Sabrina going on a date with Jughead. With no explanation, when it absolutely requires one. And then suddenly turning psycho ex-girlfriend and trying to ruin his day with magic. And at least these are intriguing new ideas, so the story's memorable and gutsy. But the art's so horrible that it's always off-putting, and it doesn't make any sense anyways. Again, it's like Pender's style writing where the ideas are out there enough to be engaging, which I can respect. So I'd take this over an uncreative bad story any day. Too bad everything about the issue in practice is awful. She goes from acting like the best girlfriend for him ever, making it look like this could actually be a good story, to suddenly flipping her lid when she should have expected him to be acting like this. So she just looks like a complete idiot and prima donna. She goes from looking trustworthy to crossing the line trying a love potion on him. And all he did on the date was be nervous because he wasn't used to dating someone he actually cares about. He wasn't being horrible. So you'd think a witch whose entire reputation is goody two-shoes as the whole subversive appeal of the series would not have this cause her to abuse magic on him the whole issue, when it was clearly her fault for going on a date with Jughead expecting a normal boyfriend. There was a story in Little Sabrina where she accepted going on a fish dinner date with Reggie. Makes just as little sense for her to date Reggie, but it'd be much more justified that she would flip out at Reggie. I wish Alexandra from Josie was doing all of this, because then we wouldn't root for her even a little, and it wouldn't be pathetically out of character to make her that petty. Thankfully, all of her magic abuse just benefits Jughead. But most of the time it's forced that it does, because biology teacher or not, his teacher would still scream at seeing snakes because they're dangerous, and think Jughead is threatening or pranking him. And after the issue shows Reggie is threatening Jughead for no reason and laughing when a sports jock hits him for no reason, as if it's thrown away his love of pranks that made him interesting in favor of making him a cliche bully. Somehow Reggie and Jughead have a wonderful time spending the dates together. So of course the writer doesn't show us how their conversation started, or even snippets of the things they said to each other that would justify them enjoying most of their time. I understand enjoying go-karting and burgers regardless of the company, but most of the time, they're just talking, and anybody would know Reggie would be driving someone crazy with his bragging all day. The story can't even keep a character consistent within one story. Eventually Sabrina uses magic to fire a laser at the sky in frustration. You'd think she'd have stopped being mad at Jughead by now. Because, you know, obviously a vital part of Sabrina is her compassion. Salem's right. No witch would find it impossible to curse someone, when she could warp ants to Jughead. All of those times she abused magic on people who deserved it or flirted with Harvey proved that her magic abuse usually works out for her. So why didn't she try any of those foolproof spells by sheer habit? It would be so much better if Salem or Hilda was doing all this magical abuse, because at least it would be in character. We could still see the concept of Sabrina doing this if she was brainwashed.